So let's continue with our revisions as we try to guide you with answering questions. If you are writing grade 12 this year, or whether GC, it's actually a good time for you to revise. C1 there says, this question is coming on, we can say acid, bases, and salts. It says the following schemes show some reaction of a dilute acid A. So you can see a dilute acid A, when it reacts with copper 2 oxide, it forms up copper 2 sulfate plus water. When the same acid reacts with magnesium, it produces substance C and hydrogen. When the same dilute acid reacts with substance B, it produces sodium sulfate and water. So you can actually identify what this acid is, because one, an acid will produce, the negative part will come from the acid, which is the sulfate. So obviously the acid, for it to have a sulfate, should have actually been, sulfuric acid. So the acid should have actually been sulfuric acid, so that if the acid was sulfuric acid, then for it to form sodium sulfate and water, it means that this substance was actually a base. So it should have actually been sodium hydroxide. So when sodium hydroxide react with the acid, it will produce sodium sulfate and water. But this same acid, which we have identified as sulfuric acid, when it reacts with the metal, remember, when acid react with a base, they produce a salt and water. When acid react with a metal, they produce a salt and hydrogen gas. So this should have actually been magnesium sulfate. So that is substance C there. Then when sulfuric acid reacts with copper 2 oxide, again it produces a salt and water. And that's why A there was simply saying that name and give the formula. So they want us to name, then we also give the formula of the dilute acid A. So the dilute acid A is simply sulfuric acid. Then the formula is H2SO4. Then substances B and C, we have identified B is simply, sodium. So that is sodium hydroxide. And sodium hydroxide, that's the right formula for sodium hydroxide. You can check out my other video on how to write formulas in case you still have challenges. Then C is representing magnesium. So C is representing magnesium sulfate. And the right formula for magnesium sulfate is that one, because both the magnesium and the sulfate radical have got a valence of 2. Then B says construct a balanced chemical equation for the reaction between substance B and dilute acid A. So substance B is simply sodium hydroxide. So when sodium hydroxide, which is in aqueous, that's the state symbol, plus sulfuric acid, they react together, they produce a salt, which is sodium sulfate. So sodium sulfate plus, in this case, H2O. So hopefully you are able to see that. We can actually balance up. You can see that here there are 2 sodium, so you can put up a 2 there. Now the moment you put up a 2, the hydrogen and the oxygen becomes affected. There are 2 oxygen, there are 2 hydrogen. But since there are 2 plus this 2, that gives it 4. So you just needed to add a 2 there. So you just needed to add a 2 there and a 2 there. Then it's balanced. Sorry, that was actually just a mistake. Then it says an ionic equation for the reaction in B1. Now remember, this is a neutralization reaction. For a neutralization reaction, from the base, you are simply getting the hydroxide ions from the base, reacting with, from the acid, you are simply getting the hydrogen ions from the acid, and that produces, H2O. But of course, you can balance up. There was a 2 in front there, and here there will be a 2 in front there, and there's a 2 in front, and that's the 2 that you are able to see there. That's a 2 you are able to see. Remember, this 2 comes in front. So the ionic equation would actually be 2 hydroxide ions, which are in aqueous, coming from the base, plus 2 hydrogen ions coming from the acid, will react to produce 2H2O, which is in liquid form. So this was simply the ionic equation that they wanted you to write there. Please watch out in my other video where I show you how to form up ionic equations. Then C says state the type of reaction that occurs in B1. So what type of reaction occurs in B1 here? This is simply a reaction we call as being a neutralization. So this is a neutralization reaction. So a neutralization reaction is a reaction where an acid and a base react to produce a salt and water. In essence, it's the hydroxide ions from the base reacting with the hydrogen ions from the acid to produce water. No wonder we call it as being a neutralization reaction. Please, if you love what we do, you can subscribe to our channel and share so that others too can actually get to learn something.